It all started with headbutting a drunk and obnoxious man on the subway. It ended in a 356-page exploration through the inner lives of violent men, including the author himself. That author is Dameon Fairless. His book, Mad Blood Stirring, attempts to navigate through the emotions preceding violent acts and the dangerous desires leading men to commit them. Dameon Fairless is here to help us explain more in his book. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about the subway story. What was happening inside of you when all of a sudden, you know, as you describe yourself, you're mostly a good-natured guy until you confront someone like this?
Yeah. Well, I was on the subway on a New Year's Eve, and I was kind of feeling crabby. I was a little uptight, and a guy started, swearing and prying open the doors of the subway, sticking his head out. And people on the subway were getting more and more anxious and quiet and worried. And inside me, I was building up. I was getting uptight, and I was getting kind of enraged at this guy. And then suddenly, I was in front of him, telling him to stop, in not so nice terms. And then things exploded. Yeah.
You describe it as an explosion, and almost a bit like, not that you went blank, but that something erased and something else replaced it.
Yeah, I think I went from being like a nice, rational, gentle, normal guy to I was just super focused on hating this guy. And I felt like the only way of dealing with him was to, physically confront him. Right? Which is silly, but that's how I felt.
So you were a journalist by trade. When journalists have questions, they go looking for answers. Yeah. And you went on a journey not only to figure out maybe your own actions, but you talked to what have been described as some of the most ruthless or evil men that we know of in Canada, from criminals or people who demonstrate extreme violence. You said you expected to find a clear divide between good and evil, but that's not necessarily what you found.
Yeah, I mean, some of the guys I talked to, I don't have any problem calling evil. I talked to a serial killer who killed 3 women and raped them and assaulted several others. I don't have any problem calling him evil. I think that's true. But a lot of the guys I spoke to, including a serial rapist who I was like nauseated at the prospect of talking to, it really made me see the people as doing good or doing evil rather than being good or being evil. And I think that's really important because it helped me see that sometimes when I was doing bad, even though I'm a good person. So yeah, it really kind of changed the way I see people that we kind of label as purely evil or purely good.
You ended up installing a landline specifically for doing some of these interviews because the prison wouldn't allow you to talk on it, or wouldn't allow one of the men in prison to call you on a cell phone. So tell us then about Daryl.
So Daryl is the name I use for the serial rapist I mentioned. And so every Sunday he'd call me on this landline because often you can't call out to a cell phone if you're an inmate. So he had permission to call this landline. And we'd talk for 20 or 40 minutes every week, or most weeks, over the course of a few months. And he kind of slowly told me his story of assaulting and raping women, starting at like 16. Oh. Yeah, it was crazy.
Was that hard to hear?
Yeah, it was really hard to hear. I mean, my wife was in the next room. I was writing that chapter when she was pregnant with our little girl. Yeah, it was really hard to hear. But I kind of felt like it was important to understand what would drive someone to do this. Right? He's like the most aberrant case of sexual assault. Yeah, it was really important to hear.
Did you find a common thread? Because there's Daryl, and then there's guys like you who see an injustice and get angry, get enraged, and act out on it. Is there a common thread?
Yeah, I think everyone I talk to, and including myself, I think fear plays a huge part. So I didn't realize when I was getting aggressive with the guy in the subway that really behind that was fear, like not being in control of that situation, worrying about my own ability to be, protective or a tough guy or whatever. But the fear drove like guys in MMA, cage fighters. It drove everyone I talked to, and I think that part of what I came out of this process was understanding if we can talk to guys about their anxieties and their fears, you've got a better chance of kind of getting a hold on the worst manifestation of that, which is the violence.
So then what did you learn? Let's bring this full circle. What did you learn about yourself, and how has it changed your reactions?
I think I've learned, I've learned just that. I've learned to kind of deal with my insecurities and anxieties and be anxious and fearful rather than allowing it to express as aggression. And so I'm a lot more aware, in a situation like the subway where I'm starting to get amped up, I'm a lot more aware, well, that's me being kind of nervous and fearful. I can deal with that. I don't have to go the aggressive route. And I think that a lot of guys, like even the worst case scenarios, like I think Daryl didn't need to be that guy if he had had someone to help him understand that aspect of himself, his fears, his anxieties. It didn't have to turn out that way. Right? Yes.
It is a fascinating look inside. I love the title, Mad Blood Stirring. Thanks so much for coming on Your Morning
Thanks, a
today.
pleasure. Thank you.